Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome. In the US, it's Memorial Day, so thank you for choosing to join us here today. I am going to begin in our usual way by speaking about our agreements here as a community. And so I'll also put it into the chat. So welcome. Thank you for choosing to spend an hour and a half with us today. These community webinars are here to support our members and the mission of spiritual integrity. We ask you all to stay connected, accountable, sensitive, and skillful when engaging today. We ask that you agree to create and maintain safe space for learning and growth. And to that end, we all agree to refrain from marketing or self-aggrandizing while avoiding inflammatory or deliberately destructive comments. If you want to recommend a relevant and appropriate resource to attendees, please do so in the chat box. If you have advice, feedback, or suggestions for another attendee, please ask for their consent before offering it during your share. The ASI will remove participants who engage in harmful activity after one warning. Thank you so much for creating this community with us, showing up with presence, attunement, and self-awareness. And don't forget, please support the ASI by contributing through our donate button on the website if you haven't done so already. Thank you. Phil, I found Oneika Mays through you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your experience of Oneika?
Well, okay. As many of you know, I have a podcast called Spirit Matters, and I interview people, and I get solicitations, pitches from publicists and authors all the time, and you can get pretty jaded. And I got one about Oneika and her new book. It was from a publicist I've come to trust and sort of call a friend. And so I looked into it, and then I said, "I'm not sure about this." and, and the publicist said, "No, really, you'll like her. You know, she's got a lot to say." And so I read uh, into her book and her website, and I said there were things that I found intriguing. And so I took a chance, and I was really glad I did. And so after that, I suggested to Jack that we might want to invite Oneika to lead a webinar for us for reasons that will become plain as she goes along. So welcome, Oneika.
Thank you so much, Phil. And that is a huge endorsement. I am so I'm so grateful. It's really a joy and an honor to be here in this brave space, right? We talk about safe spaces, but I think it's also nice to acknowledge brave spaces where those of us can gather and have conversation, have dialogue, allow times for us to reflect and call ourselves in as spiritual leaders, as teachers, as practitioners. And so being able to spend time, and again, as Jack said, taking time from a holiday weekend to talk about spiritual bypassing as teachers is a heavy lift. I'm really grateful that you're going to take the time to do that with me today. Before we get started, I actually wanted us to practice a little bit. We'll be doing a few things together. We will be sitting. I'll be doing a lot of talking. We'll do some practicing. And then hopefully we have a dialogue. And before we get started, though, in the name of that brave space, I thought we could sit and arrive together as community. So I'll invite you to take your seat, whatever that is for you. If you're sitting, if you want to lay down for a minute, you can do that. But let's get here together. And I invite you to let your eyelids get heavy. Do the eyes want to close, or do you want to keep them open? but choosing. And let your body be where you are, be where your thoughts are. Noticing any distractions around you. Sounds, vibrations. And bringing your awareness to yourself. What physical sensations are popping up? Aches, pains, places of relaxation. Noticing the quality of your inhale, the quality of your exhale. Not fixing it or changing it, just letting it be what it is right now. And I invite you to even ruminate on the question, what does it mean to bypass? What does it mean to skip over discomfort? Am I willing to gently call myself in with tenderness and with care over the next 90 minutes in order to better serve myself, the people I serve, and the world around me? Maybe making that commitment for right now. And then as you're ready, you can seal that with a breath in and out. You can lift the eyelids. They were heavy. And coming into our space together. So welcome. I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad you're all here. And for those of you watching later, I'm glad you are tuning in. So who am I? I'm a meditation teacher, or yoga teacher, trauma-informed teacher. Been teaching for about 15 years and lots of different environments. Most notably probably is Rikers Island Correctional Facility in New York, where I spent about a decade going there. Part of that time was as a volunteer, mindfulness and yoga teacher, and I was working with folks who were incarcerated. And I also worked in other jails in New York City as well. And I spent about 5 years working there full time as the jail's first mindfulness coach. And I worked as a part of New York Health and Hospitals to launch a wellness program. And I worked in conjunction with an acupuncturist and a wellness coach. And we were tasked with the challenge of creating a program that offered holistic services to people who are incarcerated to help them deal with insomnia, anxiety, and somatic issues. So going there for 5 years full time, I dealt with a lot of violence, a lot of physical violence, spiritual violence, emotional violence. And what it really helped me do was to tap in more than ever to my own practice. I'm deeply rooted in Buddhist and yogic teachings. I was just telling Jack before we got on, I don't call myself a Buddhist. I haven't taken vows to a lineage, but I live the Dharma. I teach the Dharma. And I was in a conversation with Ethan Nichtern about 3 weeks ago, who's an incredible Dharma teacher. And he said, "Oh, you're Buddhist." And I like that. I like that word, that I'm Buddhist. A little bit Buddhist, but not quite. And I mention that because the Dharma has been such a powerful tool for me. It's been a powerful way for me to live my life. It's been a powerful way for me to show up in the world, especially now in times that feel unprecedented, but I think are precedented. And I'm so grateful to be able to talk about my practice, but especially about the idea of what does it mean to bypass? What does it mean that when we are teachers or spiritual leaders, to skip over discomfort for a lot of different reasons, and lots of reasons that we're really good at intellectualizing and rationalizing and thinking is a really good idea to bypass. But ultimately, how that's going to be harmful, not just for ourselves, but for the folks that we serve and ultimately the world. So for the next, 80 minutes now, I want to talk about elements that get in the way of us being the most powerful teachers that we can be, showing up with vulnerability, with trust, and most importantly, with love. And then we'll practice a little bit more, do a little bit of writing, and then have some time to talk. So that's the agenda. I debated back and forth. Do I want to do slides? But I don't want to do slides because I want you to see me. I want to see you, and I want us to be together. So that's a little bit about me. And you'll hear a lot more about me as we go on. So first, I want to talk about the name of this class: Sacred Mess. Not sacred practice, not sacred space, but actual sacred mess. Because I think one thing that I've learned after almost 15 years of teaching is that the mess isn't the opposite of sacred. The mess is where sacred actually lives. The discomfort, the contradiction, the moment you realize you might not be as far along as you think. That's actually not a detour from the path, but it is actually the path. In 1984, John Welwood, a Buddhist psychologist, coined this term, spiritual bypassing, using spiritual practice to avoid rather than engage the unresolved wounds and shadow material from our human experience. And 40 years later, I think it remains one of the most common and least examined pitfalls for spiritual leaders, teachers, and even practitioners. And here's the part that I think should make us really uncomfortable. The more sophisticated our practice gets, like the deeper that we get into it, the better we can become at bypassing. So it's something that we have to constantly be on the lookout for. And that's not a criticism to any of us, but it's an invitation. It's a real invitation to examine. So I want to look honestly at 3 elements that I think lend itself to bypassing: shame, judgment, and guilt. Looking at these not as failures of practice, not as things to overcome or to transcend, but the very places where our most important work as teachers, it lives. So I want to talk about what happens when we forget that we're practitioners first, when the role of teacher becomes a place to hide rather than a place to serve. And I want to explore what it means to come back to beginner's mind, not as a concept that we teach, but something that we actually do, like in real time right now, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. And here's what I'm going to ask of you. I don't want to ask you to stop being a teacher, a leader, practitioner, whatever your role is. I actually want you to remember that that's what you are when we're talking right now. But to remember what teaching, leading actually requires. And it requires us to be in the room, not above it. Not to manage like from a safe distance behind your expertise or all the credentials that you have that have completely been earned. But what I've noticed as someone who's done this, right? I'm not speaking from a place of distance. I'm speaking from experience. That our role as a teacher, our role as a guide, can be one of the most sophisticated hiding places. And not because we're dishonest, not because we're malicious, but because when we take a role or position of power or teaching, it comes with built-in permission to always be the one holding the space rather than inside it. I think that's worth saying again. When we take roles of power, when we take roles of teacher or as guide, it can be easy because it's a really sophisticated hiding place. Because we can hide behind the fact that we're the teacher, that we're the expert, that we're the one holding the room. So I'm not talking about oversharing here. I'm not talking about, you need to be this teacher who overshares and everybody knows everything about you. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about creating distance. And that can be harmful when we want to hide. It's about noticing privately, honestly, what discomfort can feel like in our body and all sorts of situations when we're teaching. When you get challenged by a student, when something you wanted to teach doesn't land the way that you expected, or people don't respond in the way that you hoped, or if just something starts to arise in you when you're teaching and you don't even know why. But truly noticing that and not reaching for something to make it go away. We all have very deep practices in this room. But are we in relationship with our practice instead of using it? Is our practice allowing us to reveal insights instead of thinking of it as something that's exposed, that we want to cover up? That noticing, that discomfort, that's beginner's mind. And that's what we're going to practice today. And what ideally you'll leave with, something specific, a recognition of where shame or judgment or guilt has been quietly like running in the background or just even popping up once in a while. And not something that you are going to fix, but something that you're going to observe. Because you can't work skillfully with something you refuse to acknowledge. And if we can't call ourselves in, we will always struggle to show up fully for our students, our clients, and our communities. So that's the work. That's what we're working on today. That's what we're going to dig into. And this is very personal for me. It's very personal. I spent a lot of time surrounded when I was working inside a jail around shame, judgment, and guilt. I mean, it's something that I dealt with every single day. But there was a moment when I was a volunteer that really shifted how I deal with it. I was teaching a trauma-informed class, trauma-informed yoga and mindfulness, and I was working with another teacher. And I prided myself on embodying loving kindness and non-judgment. And that was probably my first flag that something was up, getting caught up in the pride, getting caught up in what I was doing, getting caught up in who I was, bringing these practices into a jail. And I was working in protective custody. And protective custody is a housing area inside a jail where you have people there who are in that unit for various reasons, whether it's because they're deemed that they can't go in general population because of their charges, or they're being protected from general population, or they're gang affiliated. There's all sorts of reasons why you would end up in protective custody. I was there teaching a class with another teacher, another incredible teacher. And there was the officer, when we walked in there, told us that the unit was hot that day, which was a way to just let us know that was feeling violent and fights had broken out. He didn't even want us in there. He really didn't. We were just two more people he was going to have to look out for. And he said, we just got this guy here and he mentioned, what he allegedly did. And by any estimation, you would all say that it's probably one of the most terrible things that you could do. And I remember my body getting tight when he said that to me. And it got tight for two reasons. Tight because I heard what the charge that he was being accused, allegedly, what he allegedly did. And then I was also angry at the officer for dumping that on us because that was done in a way to antagonize us, to whether it was to intimidate us, to scare us, or to let us know to be on guard. It wasn't done in a way that was meant to cause less harm. It was meant to be harmful. So that person came to our class. We did this really wonderful chair yoga class. And when we were doing a seated Shavasana pose, two guys came up to him and whispered in either side of his ear. And I didn't hear what it was, but it was really pretty clear that it was a threat. And he went pale. And I remember thinking, as soon as we leave, this guy's going to get beat up. There's nothing I can do about it. The officer saw that this was all happening. And in that moment, he was no longer this person who was accused of something, but he was this guy that I was worried about because I could see the real fear on his face. And then I was also hit with shame, my own shame, because here I was teaching loving kindness, and I was caught in conditional love, right? This idea that as long as you do this, I will love you, but you do that and I won't anymore. And it was a real pivotal moment for me as a teacher, as a practitioner. And I said, if I'm going to keep doing this, I'm going to keep doing this work, you got to examine this. Like you cannot. Everybody is worthy of your love. I didn't think I was worthy of my own love, which is why this all came up. And that's a whole nother long story. But the point is that I got triggered in a moment and I skipped over it. And this is important to note. It wasn't a learning moment because I had this revelation, I'm caught up in conditional love. It was an external thing that showed up that pointed out that I was caught in conditional love. I was fortunate that I was able to witness what happened so I could catch myself. But what I did in that moment was recognize that I got caught and to be on the lookout for it going forward because it would come up again. Right? This wasn't one thing that was going to be one and done. I was going to be caught up in moments of conditional love all of the time. But would I allow myself to acknowledge it and to own it so I could be authentic and I could be skillful? That completely changed the trajectory of me as a teacher. And it allowed me to continue to do that work as a volunteer for a few more years. But then when I was working full time, working inside a jail 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, being confronted over and over again by things that by any estimation would seem triggering to anybody, but being able to meet that day in and day out, and then ultimately making a decision that I couldn't do that anymore, which is also important to note as a teacher. When does something become too much? And not bypassing and thinking, I can handle it, I can handle it, I can handle it. So that's what we're going to dig into. And that's why it's really personal for me and should be personal for all of us. What we feel doesn't have to be separate from who we are as leaders and teachers. Doesn't mean that we have to share it, but we do need to recognize that it lives in us. I'm big on stories because the Buddha told lots of stories and I learn well by stories. I think they're just more interesting too than just talking about straight teaching, which can get a little dull, mostly if I'm doing it. But there was another time that this came up when I was working there full time. I had my own office as the mindfulness coach. I had my own office. It was like having a mindfulness practice inside a jail, which is really unique. This hadn't been done before anywhere in the United States. So I had my own office inside a very small medical clinic, and people could come see me. I worked with them one-on-one. I saw about 10 people a day. And one woman came into my office and she was a little hesitant, but had heard a lot about the program and she wanted to try meditation. So we talked about it. I would do an intake with everybody who came to see me. And she started to sit and she didn't like it and she wanted to stop. She's like, I don't like this. And I had a choice in that moment, right? As a meditation teacher, as a mindfulness coach, as a yoga teacher, I could have told her the benefits of the practice. I could have just let her know why she should just keep doing this and why it would be useful for her to keep sitting, even if she felt uncomfortable. But I had to look at the context. that this woman was sitting with me. She was incarcerated. She was told when to eat, when to sleep, when to shower, when to do anything, when to make phone calls. If the point of being a teacher, of a leader, is to allow people to find agency, their own freedom, if I was going to bypass over the fact that I was feeling a little uncomfortable because I wanted her, right? I wanted her to get the benefit of this practice, I needed to pause with myself. So we made a choice and we did some yoga, we did some walking meditation, and she loved it. And eventually did start doing a sitting practice, but that's not the point. It was my resistance that I felt in that moment that was the point. And to make a decision that was beneficial for who I was working with. And my own acknowledgement of what I was feeling in a moment. And this can all seem very basic and very obvious. And yet, we do this all of the time in lots of little ways. I'm talking about pretty big examples here to illustrate the obvious point, but it's also very subtle. Someone says something and we get a little bit annoyed and we push it away. Even the little annoyances can't be pushed away. They need to be examined. We need to call ourselves in and not sigh or roll our eyes or skip over it, which is our tendency to think that we know best, that we know ourselves best. Because the better we get at teaching, the more years we have behind us, the more wisdom we think we've accumulated, we think that the little things don't matter. But those little things add up. And we create distance. And then it's the difference between students who just want to listen to you and hear your wisdom, and the ones who ask questions and truly want to learn for their own experience. And you become like a lecturer rather than somebody who can truly be impacting people's lives and having them find agency. So maybe ultimately you're not even needed. And isn't that a terrifying thought? Or the most powerful one, depending on how we look at it. Are we teaching so people become free? Or are we teaching so we can continue to teach? Are we leading so we continue to lead? I've had my own experience too with teachers bypassing as a student. When I was doing my 200-hour certification years ago, there was a question. Do we discuss politics when we take the teacher's seat? Is that appropriate? Is that something that we want to discuss? Is that something that we want to talk about? And I remember asking, well, what do you mean by politics? Because as a Black queer woman living in the United States, kind of my identity can be seen as political, and that's who I am, and that's the place that I'm going to teach from when I'm teaching the Dharma. I'm going to relate the teaching sometimes to my own experience. And I was shut down. I was told that I wasn't really connected with the idea of oneness, and that if I was really connected with oneness, who I was didn't matter. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I disagree with that and would push back on that. Because if we are connected, if everything is connected, then doesn't everybody's experience matter, right? Isn't that all a part of our reality? And I remember how frustrated I felt and how shut down and how reduced I felt. But it ultimately became a wonderful learning opportunity for me because I knew that I would never teach that way. And I look back on that, not even with bitterness, but with like, that was bypassing in action. I didn't know what spiritual bypassing was then. I knew what it wasn't an idea, but I didn't know the name for it. So I was glad that came up. Now I'm glad it came up because I wonder how many other times that had happened to other people. I wondered how many other teachers were doing this and wanted to commit myself to not being a part of that, to not participating in that, or knowing when those things did come up that I would make sure that I dealt with them in the moment and not have it something that would ultimately harm my students. If you don't notice your stuff when it comes up when you're teaching, you can cause harm. Not because you're a bad teacher, not because you're a bad leader, not because you don't care, but unexamined material doesn't disappear, it just goes underground. Spiritual bypassing is so woven into our existence that when we're confronted with a wall, we jump over it, look back, and pat ourselves in the back thinking we've done the work. When the wall is the work. The obstacle is the thing that we need to pull apart brick by brick. And then we can continue on our path. And it's challenging, as I mentioned before. The more tools that you have, the more ways you have to avoid discomfort. Breath work, reframing, holding space, all the things that we teach, all the things that we talk about. They are also, in the wrong moment, very elegant escape hatches for us. And the teacher seat can make this worse because it comes with built-in permission to structure, to always be the one who knows, to always be the one who's a little further along, to always be the one who has something to offer rather than something to reckon with. And students unknowingly collude with this because they want you to have it together. There's an exchange to be further down the road than they are. There's pressure on both sides that feeds into this. But here's what I know for sure. Teachers who have changed my life weren't the ones who acted like they had it all figured out. They were the ones who were honest about what they didn't know, who could sit in discomfort of not having an answer or without reaching for one, who could be changed and taught by their students. That's mastery. That's true mastery. Bypassing protects us from that. And in protecting, it keeps your students, clients, community at a distance from the realest version of who you are. So the question isn't, are you bypassing? We all do it. The question is, are you willing to notice when it's happening? Because it's that noticing, that moment of honest self-recognition is where real teaching lives. So I want to talk about the three things that get in the way: shame, judgment, and guilt. I'm not going to define shame, judgment, and guilt. We know what they all are. But I want to really talk about shame for a moment. The secret keeper. It's the thing you don't say out loud because you think, they'll figure out you're a fraud. And it shows up when we feel challenged. It shows up as tightness. And when it shows up, when we're bypassing, we can reach for our authority. We become more certain. We could become more settled, more teacher or leader-like. We offer a teaching that reestablishes our power rather than eliminating distance. We make it about the resistance on the outside and possible projection of someone. And we shift from shame to blame. It's not me. And sometimes we do it so fast we don't even see it. And I know this. I've done it. And what I've learned the hard way is that keeping secrets and shame, it doesn't protect us. A concept that I found really helpful was from the Buddha, the two guardians of the world we talk about in Buddhism, Hiri and Ottapa. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha identified two mental factors that he called the guardians of the world. two forms of what we can use to transmute or translate as shame, but they're two very different animals. And the first is Hiri, which is moral shame. The internal sense of integrity that makes you hesitate before doing something that violates your values. Not because you're afraid of being caught, but because you respect yourself and have a compass. And the second is Ottapa, or moral dread. The recognition that your actions have consequences, that what you do ripples outward and affects other people, communities, and the earth. The two of these together are the guardians. It's what keeps us ethical, honest, and accountable. But for some of us, along the way, Hiri and Ottapa, healthy protectors, collapse into something. Chronic self-deprecation, or the kind of thing that says, I didn't do something harmful, but I am harmful, or I'm broken, or I'm a fraud. And we only feel that for a flash, but we want to cover it up. But Buddhism is very clear about this. It's not, this kind of shame isn't humility. It's like ego clinging and attachment. It keeps us so focused on something terrible we feel about ourselves that we never have to do the work of changing. And so instead of holding on to the terrible feeling, we push it down or use our practice to try to skip over it. But the Buddha also gave us a roadmap for dealing with shame constructively in 4 steps. That we acknowledge the support of our community, of our lineage. I'm not the first person to screw up and won't be the last. My dad always used to say, don't act the fool. That was his big thing. He always used to say, don't act the fool when you're doing something. It's another way of just remembering your internal compass. But when you do, bring genuine regret. Not performing it, not wallowing, but honest examination of what happened. And this doesn't have to happen externally. I'm talking about an internal conversation that we're having. And the more that we practice this becomes habit. It becomes the way that we move. And after we bring genuine regret, we make a resolve. And not some sort of vague intention or hope, but a genuine decision to do something differently and apologize where needed, and to actively cultivate the opposite of the harm that you've caused. We're talking about accountability. And it's the difference between toxic shame and moral shame. Toxic shame feels paralyzing, makes us want to hide. Moral shame moves us to repair. Moral shame is something that we can discuss in the open. But as leaders, we need to know if toxic shame is sort of running in the background somewhere, or when it arises and what it feels like. Because when it shows up, and if we don't want to deal with that toxic shame, you will bypass every time because the shame becomes too uncomfortable to stay with. And the people we serve pay the price for that, as well as ourselves. The second thing that arises is judgment. And judgment happens. I'd like to call myself an Olympic level judger because it's really something that I constantly work with. I even judged when I got on a spiritual path. I had a whole nother career before I started doing what I've been doing. And when I found this path that I found so liberating and so helpful and so healing, I judged myself because I was mad that I didn't find this sooner. I was angry that I didn't find it sooner. Why didn't I get on this path before? The very practice that was healing me was also showing up in this form of judgment. And I didn't realize at that moment that I needed to use my practice to honor the judgment, that I was really just grieving. I was really just grieving, and grief is okay. And that's why we have practices, so we can evaluate what's going on and be with reality. It is very easy as a leader to create your own reality. rather than seeing things for what they are. I should have known. I should have done this differently. Angry that it's not enough. And I was able to lift that up and look underneath and see sadness. I judged in 2020 when we were all in lockdown. Today happens to be the anniversary of George Floyd's murder, which happened here in the United States. A reckoning happened in our country, in the United States. And people started to post these like little black squares on Instagram showing solidarity with Black people. I found it really annoying. And I judged it. I judged these people for doing this, thinking they've never done this before. But the truth was, this was just people doing the best that they could. I was once again sad and grieving over what happened. I was also exhausted for lots of other different reasons. But I recognized it in the moment. Even when I was judging, I was like, what's really going on here? These things that arise for us, this resistance that comes up, can be a flag. It can be a moment to pause and say, what's really happening? And can I take a moment to deal with that and deal with myself? And we have to practice this all of the time. And it's easy to forget, as I mentioned before, because the longer we practice, the more tools that we have, and the easier it is to write it off as something else. Well, of course you're mad. You should be mad. Righteous rage. But it wasn't righteous rage. It wasn't righteous anger. Righteous anger would have led me in a productive path of doing something, of teaching, of honoring myself, of grieving. But I didn't. Instead, I pointed fingers at other people saying they were doing something incorrectly. That's the difference. This isn't about making anything go away, but it's recognizing the reality of what is happening and dealing with that and tending to ourselves, the way that we tend to the people that we serve. And we need to do this consistently so we can show up authentically, not as lecturers, but as teachers who are looking to make change in the world, who are looking to make space for people so they can be their own brave space, so they can be their own safe space. Because there are no safe spaces. There are not. We can create spaces that are the safest that we think that they can be, but we aren't in other people's experiences. So the brave space that we create is for ourselves and for the people that we're serving, so they can show up and have agency and speak up and speak out. And we don't see that as an attack or a judgment, but a place to have honest conversation and honest dialogue and growth. Working at a place like Rikers was full of judgment. This person did this. This person did that. At least I didn't do that. Incarcerated people judging each other, officers judging people who are incarcerated, staff judging everybody. And if you're in an environment where you're surrounded by lots of chaos, this can be really challenging because we get swept up in our environment. We get swept up in what is happening. And I used to get caught up. The practice that helped me, the practice that supported me and sustains me to this day is loving kindness, unconditional friendliness towards myself, others, and nature. That corny adage that we talk about is true. When you point one finger at someone, you're really pointing three fingers back at you. And I had to learn how to ask myself, can I pause? Not as a way to let myself off the hook, but as a way to let myself get curious. What is this judgment telling me about what I need to know right now? What does it reveal about where I am in this moment? A teacher who can ask that question honestly, privately, or leader can be faced with any difficult situation instead of shutting it down. That's the difference between judgment that paralyzes and judgment that informs. One keeps you distant, and the other, I think, returns you home to yourself again and again. And I think guilt for me is also one of the sneakiest of the three that I'm talking about today, because guilt can look like accountability. It can even feel like integrity. It can even wear like this cloak of humility so convincingly that you don't realize that it's keeping you stuck. I would feel guilty about being at Rikers. I'm an abolitionist by nature. I'm an abolitionist by training. I'm an abolitionist by my activism. And yet I worked in an environment that was the center of mass incarceration. And I had to constantly hold those two truths inside my body and that conflict and that contradiction. I had a dream job. I was a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher who was able to use those and work full time in an environment serving marginalized folks who are at what's probably the lowest point of a person's life. And I was able to do that and get paid doing it, got paid well to do it, and support myself, support my family. It looked like a dream. And every day I felt guilt for being able to go home, for being able to leave people I had grown very close to, and being able to escape what was really one of the worst places that I've ever had to work in my entire life. But that guilt wasn't helpful, because unexamined, it started to turn into self-righteousness. I was so consumed by how terrible everything was that the focus became on the suffering of how terrible the environment was. And I wasn't always completely focused on the people that I was serving. It put me at the center of the story. My suffering became the focus. So people got less of me instead of all of me. And this happens in spaces all of the time when we're working with folks who may be suffering from really tragic circumstances. Having these feelings is fine, but not doing something about it is the issue, or pretending that it's something else became the issue. We make mistakes. We say things that aren't helpful. But instead of moving through it, we either drown it or try to skip over it. And then we just create more guilt. There was a time that I was working with someone who was trans. And because I'm Gen X and a kid of the 70s and 80s, I say the word dude way more than I should. And I say dude all of the time. And we were laughing about something. It was the end of our session and we were wrapping up. And she said something and I cracked up and I said, "Oh, dude, that's so funny." And this was a trans woman that I said this to. And I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I completely misgendered you. That's a mistake. I won't do that again." And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, it's okay. I knew what you meant. And thank you for saying that. But I knew what you meant." And that was a shift for me because I didn't drown in feeling so embarrassed over misgendering somebody. I'd made this horrible mistake. And that was at the height of when we were really trying to embrace pronouns and really try to honor people for where they were. And I didn't get caught up. I made a mistake. I apologized. We moved on. End of story. And that was a moment that I realized it's not such a big deal when we make a mistake and we can own it and we can move on from it. We're not ruminating. Buddhism makes a really important distinction between intelligent regret and guilt. Intelligent regret says, I caused harm. I feel that. I want to understand and do better. It's temporary and it moves as the impermanence of life does. And it acts as a compass, moving us to restoration. Guilt says I'm a bad person, I'm broken. And we may not even say all of that as a teacher because we're so quick to jump over it. But that's what's happening in the background. But there's steps that we can move through so we can see guilt clearly. And again, it's about having genuine regret, resolving not to repeat it, and reaffirming the positive and taking action. Apologize when needed, make amends when you can. And then the part that we tend to skip is forgiving ourselves. Forgiving ourselves is not optional. It's not indulgent. It's necessary. We need to be able to model as leaders forgiveness for ourselves. So we're not holding on to that energy that keeps us distant from our work, from what we're trying to do. Restoration. We're even trying to have these conversations in the justice space. You may have heard the term of restorative justice. Restorative justice says when harm has been caused, we can get two parties together to talk about the harm that was caused, and we restore the person who's been harmed back to the place they were before the harm was caused. And the person who's caused the harm, that's their obligation to do that. There's also another term, transformative justice, which takes it a step beyond, where both parties are transformed, not just brought back to where they were, but a place where both people can move forward. So can we transform ourselves? So we're just not bypassing anymore. We acknowledge when we're bypassing, when we do something, so we're making sure we're not caught in that. But can we really transform from these instances? Can this be a place that we lead from? Can this be a place that we teach from? Can this be something that transforms us and we end up transforming the world around us? Forgiveness is critical. It allows us to disconnect from that energy that's either connected to shame, guilt, or judgment. Metta, loving kindness, was my antidote to all of this. I would hate myself when I made a mistake. I'd find myself just talking to myself in a terrible way, even after having a deep practice. That insecurity of not being enough would always show up. So my practice of unconditional friendliness for myself and the world around me is a powerful practice. And metta starts with ourselves, but it expands outward. So we offer that unconditional friendliness to ourselves, and then we include a loved one or a benefactor, a neutral person or a stranger, and then a difficult person. Because we all have parts of ourselves that we love. We all have parts of ourselves that are unfamiliar. We have all parts of ourselves that we don't like. But can we sit with that? And when we learn how to do that consistently, when something arises, we no longer bypass. We examine and we make space for it. You can think of it as like tenderness is this baton that we're holding on to, and then we can pass it off to the people that we serve. By teaching about it, by living it in the mess and the mistakes. In the moments that you got it wrong, but chose repair over self-punishment. And that's the practice. And it's available all of the time. So I've named what gets in the way, but I want to also talk about how we get over this, right? Some tools. And as a Buddhist person, I want to talk about the four Brahma Viharas, or the divine abodes. There are four qualities that we can inhabit that help me navigate. So if the tendency to bypass rises, I can meet it. The four Brahma Viharas are qualities of the heart. And I want to offer them to you today as tools, as ways that you can inhabit yourself, regardless of your tradition, to be present. They're my guideposts, and I hope they're helpful. And the first one is loving kindness, unconditional friendliness. It gives me a chance to soften so I can pause. Because when I pause, I remember my own humanity. And then I can see the humanity of someone in front of me. There's a practice I use called just like me. Just like me, someone wants to be seen. Just like me, someone's insecure. And saying that allows me to remember in a moment when I'm angry or triggered that this person is coming from their own experience. We need to remember to do it. It can happen, when we're in these leadership and power roles, when someone triggers us or says something, or we feel ourselves get tight. Instead of saying just like me, we say just not like me. I'm better. We may not say it like I'm better. We may come up with different ways to say I'm better. But we use teachings. We over intellectualize to make the situation reduced or feel smaller. And we can ultimately make other people feel smaller by doing that. So loving kindness is a living practice. You can practice it as a meditation, but it's this idea of wishing people well, wishing yourself well. It's a capacity that I return to over and over and over again. And it's the antidote to fear and ill will. And the second one is compassion. And it's the antidote to suffering. And we don't want people to suffer. I don't want myself to suffer. I don't want other people to suffer. Remembering this is also a way not to bypass. And it's a fine line for spiritual leaders. We're trained to serve, to hold. But we need to be careful of what we call a near enemy in Buddhism, which is like the shadow side of the quality that we want to employ. It looks like the quality, but not quite. The shadow of loving kindness is conditional love. And the shadow of compassion is pity. And we can do that for ourselves, and we do that to other people. And again, these things arise when we want to jump over it. But having a space to allow ourselves to pause so we can honor it and hold it allows us to show up authentically. The third quality is sympathetic joy, being able to genuinely celebrate for a person's growth, success, or liberation. And the near enemy is comparison. And then finally, equanimity. It's not distance, but it's a sense of things being balanced. It's not detachment, but it's clear seeing things as they are and not being pulled to try to manipulate or fix, and not being caught up in our own likes and dislikes and preferences. All of these tools They help us with honest self-recognition, with noticing. And these 4 qualities can help us when we feel tension arise, when we feel shame, judgment, or guilt arise in our leading, in our teaching, and it keeps us from causing harm without knowing it. And that's our practice. That's what sacred mess is all about. I want us to actually do a little bit of practice again, a little bit of a longer practice. I've been doing a lot of talking, you've been thinking or taking notes, and I want you to stop all of that for just a moment and give yourself a chance to find a real seat so we can do a longer sit together. Or you can lay down. Just find what works for you right now. And I invite you to offer yourself some gratitude for sitting, for noticing what came up, things that felt obvious, and yet maybe things that you haven't been honoring, even though they're obvious. Offer yourself gratitude for that. And here's the invitation. What's alive inside you right now? After everything we've explored, shame, judgment, guilt, compassion, loving kindness. What's alive inside you right now? What sounds or vibrations are obvious to you right now? Distractions, and what sounds are more subtle? The hum of a computer, another appliance, a fan, your own breath. And now bringing some awareness to your body. Starting at the top of your head, simply observing any sensations behind the eyes, the jaw, your throat, the shoulders, and move down to your body, to the center of your body, your abdomen. Moving down your legs, all the way to where your body ends. And as you're ready, bring some awareness to your emotional landscape. What's present? Joy, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise. Just let it be there. There's nothing to fix or change. And now thoughts. What's the quality of what you're thinking right now? One thought, several on a loop. Thinking about now or what's next. Just let them be. And now noticing your inhale and your exhale. How many beats does it take you to breathe in? How many beats does it take you to breathe out? And then gently letting go of that. And asking yourself again, what's alive inside me right now? And just noticing what's there. Fidgeting, boredom, and need to get it right. And then to close, allowing yourself to take a breath in and out. And offering yourself some gratitude for sitting with whatever mess came up. You can seal your practice in whatever way you like. And then you can open your eyes and come back. And now that we're back, taking some time to think about everything that I talked about and how you're feeling or what you're thinking, what came up for you, either in practice or over the course of what I said. And we can chat a bit. Is that Farah? Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, that's right. It was such a lovely and something that I really need to hear today. I truly appreciate that. I truly appreciate your honesty, your openness to share your story, your feeling, what you're going through with all of us. I really admire that. And the journey that you have gone through, which I don't think is different than the journey that we're all going through. So it's just the shared humanity that you shared. So I appreciate that. What it came to me, I'm also a therapist, and what is came, I always wants to work with the unserved population, and I work with the Department of Mental Health for 18 years. But now that I'm in that private practice, some part of me feels shame that I shifted that from, because most of the private practice have insurance, most of the people have insurance, we just have a stable work and blah blah blah. So I noticed the shame that it comes to me for that, and then guilt came that I also finished teaching mindfulness and loving kindness, but I'm not teaching. I don't feel competent enough. And the guilt comes that when you learn that, why you're not teaching. And then the sadness came because now I'm the full-time caretaker for my husband, who has a very severe Parkinson and much more. And the sadness that I feel locked down in this situation. And all I'm doing is just giving to my husband and myself and my small family around me, which again is just go back to the shame, right? And when you notice, when you at the end, when you say is what is inside, I noticed that there is a duality in me and in all of us, which is the duality that is work for me is, yes, I'm generating loving kindness and care for immediate, and at the same time, I'm in total mess of not being where I wanted to be. So is that duality is exist, and I think that's part of life, probably. Thank you.
Hi, Annie.
Hi there. This was so wonderful. I was brought up Catholic, and you presented forgiveness and guilt in such an, healthy way. I didn't receive that as a child. And, over the years, I've healed a great deal of that, but that was extremely helpful, because guilt was a preponderance in the religious training, which was not helpful when you're a young child. It's hard to figure that out. But it was interesting when you gave us now the instruction to meditate, I found tears coming to my eyes because all of a sudden I had this great sort of love and appreciation for myself. Like what came up was, I've really tried hard in this life to do the right thing, to be there for myself and others. And it was just this moment. I don't know if I've ever had such a moment of clarity of just giving to myself and recognizing the efforts I've made. And for some reason, that just felt so healing and wonderful. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Annie. Thank you.
Mhm.
Hi, Jerry.
Hello there.
Hello there.
I actually exist. Uh, this is a tough one. I have a pretty hard time in the world of spiritual teachers and spiritual awakening. And the thing that comes to mind from your comments, which were just brilliant and so incredibly welcome, I really, really appreciate what you're doing. It is profoundly needed. You used a phrase, when the tendency to bypass arises. And that carries with it a presumption, which is that people are going to know if they're bypassing or not. And somehow or other, some little, alarm will go off. Oops, oops, oops. Oh, well, I might be bypassing. Oh, I better be more attentive. But it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
Bypassing is utterly and completely unconscious. And I have run into, long-standing situations where I was subjected to repetitive, habitual, I would say dominating or dismissive behavior by spiritual teachers or spiritual leaders, called them out on it, tried to say, whoa, 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 I'm asking you not to do this, and been utterly and completely shut down or ignored. That's a huge frustration, and I'm deeply wounded by it, and I carry that wound all the time. There needs to be a system of tools that are structured around behaviors. Someone is saying, pay attention, there's a problem here, look at me. I'm asking you, to change the way you're interacting with me. That should automatically trigger some kind of an alert. Oh, I better pay attention. This is a moment for self-examination. Did I do something? What have I done? Have I really understood what this person is trying to convey? It's just an inherent characteristic of the highest stages of enlightenment that there are still going to persist blind spots and whole zones of territory and whole aspects of human interaction that are still completely oblivious. And in everything that you said, I was greatly encouraged by the insight, but most of it was kind of a self-therapy and not action-oriented. How do I deal with this issue that came up? What is this issue signaling to me about my own blind spots and my own spiritual bypassing? And I don't have an answer for that. Well, I do have an answer. In my own experience, years and years and years ago, I've been meditating for 54 years and had, the whole range of experience of unfoldment of the fruits of that meditation. And at some point I found that, wait a minute, I have these experiences of unboundedness and unity and all of that. And still, as you were very wise to point out, life is a mess. So the teaching that I've incorporated that says all you have to do is wake up and then everything automatically fixes itself. Well, no, it doesn't. And back this was 40 years ago. there was nobody coming around writing books like, after the ecstasy, the laundry, right? Ken Walton, Ken Wilber hadn't yet delineated these different lines of development. You can wake up, but you also have to grow up and you have to clean up and all of that. And so I had to look around at what was available then. And I found transactional analysis in a book called Games People Play that goes into the unconscious impulses that give rise to interactions that may be top down or infant to parent, the guru disciple relationship would fit perfectly in the what do they call it? Ego states diagram there of, parent to child like that. That's the short answer for it is I'm okay, you're okay. Or I'm not okay, you're okay. Or I'm okay, you're not okay. And there are permanent combinations of all of that. And to get my own life more or less straightened out, because there's always, always going to be work to do. I found that extremely useful, and it allowed lights to come on where I would see, oh, wait a minute, I'm approaching this person in a way that's not an equal relationship, or, oh, I triggered that person by hooking them with a certain trigger. And there are emotional, psychological reasons people do that. We all need attention of one kind or another. We all need a connection of one kind or another. And sometimes we'll get that attention and we'll make those connections by pissing people off or leading them on or, something like that. So you get these complicated interactions. So there's something back there, but, there needs to be some system of understanding and methodology to unmask and heal the spiritual bypassing, because it's completely unconscious in almost every case, and just a little glimmer of light comes on, and maybe you recognize, I might be spiritually bypassing here, and you get that one little glimmer. There may be a whole dark swamp of spiritual bypassing that is completely unknown, uncharted territory. So anyway, I've gone a long time. That's enough. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Jerry. Hi, Han.
Hi, Oneika. I really thank you for your talk today. It's really useful because I recognize that problem in myself. Being a teacher or leader, in the middle of the talk, you realize that I realize that I'm talking and feeling the sense of being a fake or pretender, or something unexpectedly showed up, or sometimes realize myself talking from knowledge versus, experience or realness. I think for me, it comes from the sense of, should I, talk about this, but it's useful that you mentioned that we just recognize it and know that it's happening versus talk it out loud or share it, with students. Because it's very hard to do that. That's that convention, unspoken convention that you're supposed to teach, you're supposed to know, or you're supposed to be perfect, which we know we're not. But it's that unspoken convention or agreement that, between teacher and student, or between, the two, that, this is supposed to be the way, but it's not. I I realized that in my local group, local sangha, there's some people that I automatically have judgment for a long time, for 20 plus years. And I don't know it. I didn't know it. I'm like, and then later when I see that person again, and I noticed that I was happy or joyful before that, before I see the person. And when that person showed up, I'm like, gone. I'm like, what happened? Why is that? That helped me to question and then realize that, oh, I've been judging this person for a long time, but not knowing it because there's an exception category. This person falls into an exception category, which of course that person is, doesn't practice well or do this or do that. And it falls into that, category. So I never really look at it. It's automatically judgment every time I see the person. So that's what happened. That's all I want to share. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Looks like we have a few minutes left if there's a quick thought somebody wants to offer.
Just to say to everybody, in the checkbox, you'll see a link, an Amazon link to Oneika's book, Sit With Me, and her own website where she, you can see the quality of the content that she shares. So if this has opened some doors inside you, which it certainly has with me, please pursue. There's help out there. There's more insights out there. She's just a fountain of wisdom in this area. Vilasini?
Yes. Just a quick question for Oneika. I don't know where I went, but you were giving 4 tips, tools, and I remember loving kindness and metta, and I can't remember the other 2. Can you?
Yes, I was talking about the 4 Brahma Viharas. So
Yes.
it's loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
Okay. I want to thank you all so much for your thoughtful reflections, for your presence. It was truly an honor and a blessing to spend time with you today. And thank you for having me. And I'd like you all.
Do you have any podcast?
Huh?
Do you have any podcast that we can listen?
I do have a podcast. It's called You Good. I actually just started it that I do with another teacher. Her name is Pamela Stokes Eggleston. You can find it on Substack. We only have 3 out right now. We literally just launched it like a month ago. So
Okay. It's Be Good?
You Good.
You Good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oneika, someone's asking in the chat if you're willing to share your email address for questions.
Sure. It's Oneika at oneikamays.com. Thank you.
Huge gratitude to you, Oneika. I feel like I've been through a washing machine in a really good way. A cycle that was at the appropriate pace for me today. I feel very different to what I felt 90 minutes ago. Just much more connected and open on the inside. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. Thank you all.
Just huge gratitude to you seems insufficient, but it's all I got. And so on behalf of the ASI and everybody here, thank you for the path you're walking, and thank you for taking the time to share the gems that you've learned along the way with us. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Oneika. Thank Beth for connecting us.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah. And see you all on June 29. That's the next one for the Save the Date. Thank you all.